Um, we did want to get into. You had an article that you wrote in Politico um, a while back. Before I even get into that article, I do want to read another quote from your book. Conservatism, then, is not a commitment to limited government and liberty or a weariness of change, a belief in evolutionary reform, or a politics of virtue. These may be byproducts of conservatism, one or more of its historically specific and ever changing modes of expression. So you see these as just byproducts of conservatism and not conservatism at large.
Yeah, this there's certain things I regret writing, not because I was wrong, not because I think they were wrong, but because I feel like people seize upon them, and sometimes your allies and friends are more of a problem than your enemies. Because I think what the left has taken that quote to mean, and similar, is that somehow or another conservatism is just this raw defense of power,
Mhm.
and that it's completely opportunistic in the stupidest sense of that word, and that it'll just pick up any argument that's on hand in order to defend power, quote unquote, as if what power is obvious to people and so forth. And I don't. That's not the meaning of that quote. The meaning of the quote is that conservatism is a defense of of specific kinds of social domination. What those forms are will change over time, okay? And that in the course of defending those forms of social domination, conservatism will come up, is improvisational, and is very inventive, and will come up with new arguments that don't look very much like the older arguments that it used to defend. So the point of the book is to try to see both the theme, the ongoing theme, and the improvisation that happens over the time, and that you can't understand one without the other. And the left doesn't even think of it as a theme; they think of it as a kind of reflex of power that's unintellectualized, is untheorized, is just raw and immediate. And that's just not the way it works. As I said earlier, it takes the right years, sometimes decades, to figure out the arguments it's going to use and that will work. And then once it's figured out those arguments, it's beholden to them for some period of time until they no longer work. And then it has to come up with new ones.
So, Corey, I'm glad we're coming here because let's move beyond uh, Obama to the rise of Trump. Now, this might get contentious, and I think we're friendly enough that it can. You posit some really interesting theories in your book that basically Trump was a very weak conservative president, that he didn't get his agenda effectively done, and that Trump and Trumpism is a weak phenomenon. Corey, I told you I have a lot of respect for you, but I'm going to just list some things. Trump gave the Republicans a majority in the Supreme Court that they haven't seen in years with hardcore reactionaries. Trump got a massive corporate tax cut. We've had three presidents of regressive tax cuts in a row, and he was the third. Right? I read the piece where you're talking about how Trump was kind of vacillating on China. I would argue that Trump actually reignites a Cold War, at least in atmospherics, with China, regardless of his one China policy. Uh, I would say that even though I don't think it was a success, Trump's attempt to weaponize trade to punish the Chinese definitely starts a rhetorical anti-China policy that I think Biden has continued. Quite honestly, um, I think that Trump's scuttling of the Iran nuclear deal definitely was a success as well. Now that's just his presidency. I would say that Trumpism, the phenomenon of Trumpism, where you have 25 to 30 states literally right now enacting anti CRT, which basically means anti Black history laws, voter suppression laws.
And don't forget to add in this hearing for this potential Supreme Court justice, they're bringing up CRT laws and the reading of Anti-Racist Baby, which
we have. I mean, listen, you and I are close in age. We have literally anti-abortion laws in states that were unheard of in the last 50 years. In Texas, now if you literally go to an abortion doctor, you can be sued. Anti-trans laws. In the face of that, Professor Corey Robin, how can you make the argument that the contemporary manifestation of the reactionary right is weak and ineffective, and also realizing that globally the reactionary right and the neoliberal global order are the only dialectic that we still have, and the left isn't even relevant?
Okay.
I don't think he said ineffective. Did you say ineffective or did you say weak?
I said ineffective and weak.
So it's fine. We don't have to get caught up in the adjectives. I'll give you my account of the record and how it differs.
Here it comes.
So I think the first thing to look at is something that people on the left aren't usually that interested in, and that's budgets. Joseph Schumpeter, the economist, once said, the nation's you find that the essence of the nation is written in its fiscal history. That is the thunder of world history, is the budget. And if you look at Trump's budgets, what's interesting about them, and we have to remember those first 2 years, right, when the Republicans had total control over both houses of Congress and the White House, is that they were Obama budgets. And when I say Obama budgets, I don't mean that liberal, but they were not conservative budgets. Trump had wanted, with Paul Ryan, to cut a whole bunch of things, including the really kind of culture war, red meat kind of stuff, Planned Parenthood, the Health and Human Services, the National Endowment of the Humanities, National Endowment of all these kind of liberally kind of things that on the one hand don't mean very much, but mean a lot to the base. He was unsuccessful in all of those things. In fact, money was expanded and spending on all that. So if you look at social spending, it actually went up. Domestic social spending, not a right-wing project. It was something that Paul Ryan tried to reverse and was unable to do. Immigration is something that, of course, got, for rightful reasons, an awful lot of attention. Interestingly, Trump was never able to get an immigration bill through Congress at all. Nor was he able to get funding for his wall with this, kind of epic single, thing that was supposed to be so important to him. And in fact, I was looking recently at the numbers on immigration. What's interesting is just prior to the pandemic, the immigration numbers under Trump were pretty much what the highest numbers had been under Obama. So in other words, 70% of immigration in this country is documented. And Trump wasn't really able on the whole to touch that kind of stuff. And then you come to the Supreme Court. And I think this is, in a way, I don't want to be too clever here, but it almost proves the point that I want to make about the right. Remember, we talked about the right as a reactionary project and achieving hegemony, not just over the state, not just over the party, but over the other party and the public at large. That kind of hegemony has been waning. You mentioned the tax cut, Trump's tax cut. Ronald Reagan's tax cuts got something like 150 Democrats voting for it. George W. Bush's got something like 50 Democrats. Trump got not a single Democrat to vote for his tax cuts. It was by the skin of their teeth. It was a purely Republican thing. And it was the one thing around which the Republicans could unite. That and then the courts. I see the Republicans' focus on the courts as not a sign of strength, but as a desperate scramble to lock in judges, knowing that this project is coming undone. You may remember John Adams, the famous midnight judges. These were all the judges that he appointed the Adams administration just before Thomas Jefferson took over, and they thought it was going to bring in this revolution. Judicial appointees on that score. It was why was Mitch McConnell so maniacally focused on this? It's because they do understand that they are losing control over the legislative process, that even when they have full power over all the elected branches of government, they are unable, with the exception of the tax cuts, to get their agenda through. And so what do? You start relying upon these counter-majoritarian institutions like the courts. Likewise, this whole business with the Electoral College, in a way, this is where we sort of overlook the novelty of this, that we've had the last two Republican presidents who had to be elected, not with the popular vote, but with the electoral vote, something that hadn't happened since the end of the 19th century. That is not the sign. That is not the sign of a movement in its ascendancy. That is a sign of a movement that is holding on to whatever levers that it can. It doesn't mean that it can't do damage. That's not my thesis at all. But it does mean that its political capacity to kind of organize and lock down the broader discourse and what legislatively is on the table is significantly hampered now in comparison to Ronald Reagan or Judge George W. Bush. And those are my comparative points. This is not to say that the Republicans can get nothing done. That would be an absurd claim to make, obviously. But compared to the transformative effects in terms of organizing the national discourse, changing the basic commitments of the state, there's really, I don't think, any comparison.
I mean, do you feel it's interesting that we're talking about things like immigration, because a lot of these immigration laws and the changes in immigration to make it even more draconian really starts under Clinton. A lot of the prisons are filled under Obama, but built under Bush II. Right. And by the time Trump comes around, don't you feel, and this question is to the panel, don't you feel that ultimately these laws are so set in stone that all Trump is talking about at this point is just bluster?
I live
near the wall. Like, I live in Mexico, and I have to see it.
I really disagree with that. I mean, I understand that position, and I hear it a lot, but I feel like it's too fluid a position, because it basically, if the Trumpists get what they want, then we say, aha, you see, this is what they wanted and how powerful they are. And if they don't get it, we say, well, they didn't really want it anyway. It's just a kind of, a lot of noise. The truth is, they fought tooth and nail for this kind of stuff. Trump was furious, and it caused huge rifts within. I mean, the fact that, when I was growing up, I understood the Republican Party as kind of this lockstep party that whenever it had power, it exercised it. That was always the myth. And of course, the Democrats were the feckless ones who had power and just somehow like frittered it away. This has always been the stereotype. Mm-hmm. And I understand that's that point of view. And as a leftist, I love to knock on the Democrats when that happens. But the truth of the matter is that they've held together far more than the Republicans did under Trump. I mean, it's sort of a sad fact, but it's true. And we forget all those defeats. I mean, I just want one final defeat. And again, it's kind of wonky, but it's hugely important. So all presidents, pretty much back to Jimmy Carter, have vetoed at one point or another, have vetoed what Congress passed in terms of the military budget for one reason or another. And every time it's happened, Congress has had to back down and accommodate Jimmy Carter, all of them. The one time that Congress not only refused to go along with what a president did, the president vetoed it, and then Congress overrode the veto, was under Trump. And that was his own party repudiating him on a whole bunch of stuff. Not just, not because he was being sort of pseudo-liberal in his military budget at all. No, it was a lot of other stuff, like, remember, Confederate flags on military bases. He wanted to keep them. The Republican Party, oddly enough, said, no, they got to go. So anyway, there's too many of these kinds of things where he and the Trumpist flank gets pushed back for me to say that somehow, this is a kind of right-wing revenge and, triumphant. Because compared to what I saw under George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, he has been significantly stymied, I would argue.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out. You can catch the live stream of This is Revolution every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. This is Revolution.